The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's bar like angry fists demanding entry. Inside, the warm glow of amber lights fought against the darkness that seemed to seep through every crack and corner. The usual Friday night crowd had gathered, construction workers still dusty from their shifts, office clerks drowning their weekly sorrows, and the regulars who treated the worn leather stools like thrones in their kingdom of forgotten dreams. Sarah Mitchell sat at the far end of the bar, her fingers wrapped around a glass of whiskey that had long since grown warm. She hadn't touched it in over an hour, but holding it gave her hands something to do while her mind raced through the events that had led her here. The dim light cast shadows across her face, highlighting the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like winter cold. She was 28 years old, though she felt decades older. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore the same black jeans and gray sweater she'd thrown on that morning when life still made sense. Now, sitting in this bar surrounded by strangers, she wondered if anything would ever make sense again. The bartender, a kind-faced man named Tom who'd been serving drinks at Murphy's for 15 years, occasionally glanced her way with concern. He'd seen enough broken people pass through his establishment to recognize the signs. Sarah wasn't drunk, she'd barely sipped her whiskey. She was something else entirely. She was lost. Behind her, conversations flowed like water around rocks. Someone was complaining about their boss. Another person was planning a weekend fishing trip. A couple in the corner booth was having a quiet argument about money. Life continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that Sarah's world had shattered just 6 hours earlier. Her phone buzzed against the bar top. Another text message. She didn't need to look to know it was from her sister Emma, probably asking where she was, if she was okay, whether she needed anything. Emma had always been the responsible one, the one who made careful choices and planned for every possibility. Sarah had always been the dreamer, the risk-taker, the one who believed everything would work out simply because she wanted it to. Today, that optimism had finally broken. The letter was still folded in her jacket pocket, the edges already soft from her nervous fingers. She could recite every word by memory now. The formal language, the apologetic tone, the devastating conclusion. After 3 years of investigation, the military had finally closed her brother Marcus's case. Missing in action, presumed dead. No body recovered. No final answers. Just a form letter and a flag that would arrive in the mail within 7 to 10 business days. Marcus had been her twin, born exactly 4 minutes after her on a snowy December morning. They'd shared everything, secrets, dreams, inside jokes that could make them laugh until their sides hurt. When he'd enlisted in the army at 19, Sarah had been devastated, but she'd supported his decision because she knew it was what he needed to do. He'd always been the type of person who wanted to serve something bigger than himself. The last time she'd seen him was 2 years ago, when he'd come home on leave. They'd spent an entire day at the lake where they used to fish as children, talking about everything and nothing. He'd seemed different then, quieter, more thoughtful. When she'd asked him about it, he'd just smiled that crooked smile of his and said he was fine, just tired. 3 months later, his unit had been ambushed during a routine patrol in Afghanistan. 4 soldiers had been killed immediately. 2 others, including Marcus, had simply vanished. For 3 years, Sarah had held on to hope. She'd called the military liaison officer so often they knew her by name. She'd researched every possible scenario, followed every lead, refused to give up. Now the government was asking her to do exactly that. The bar door opened with a sharp chime, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of rain. Sarah didn't turn around, but she heard heavy footsteps crossing the wooden floor, heard the creak of a stool being pulled out somewhere behind her. Another lost soul seeking shelter from their storms. She thought about Marcus's laugh, the way he used to snort when something really amused him. She thought about the time they'd gotten lost in the woods behind their house when they were 7, and how he'd held her hand in the darkness and told her stories until their father found them. She thought about his last email, sent just days before he'd disappeared, complaining about the food and asking her to send more of their mother's chocolate chip cookies. Their mother had never recovered from losing Marcus. She died 2 years ago, her heart giving out from the strain of carrying so much grief. Their father had retreated into himself, spending most of his time in his workshop, building birdhouses that no one would ever buy. Emma had tried to keep the family together, but some breaks were too complete to mend. Sarah lifted the whiskey glass to her lips and, finally, took a sip. It burned, but it was a welcome distraction from the burning in her chest. She'd always been strong, the one people turned to when they needed support. But, sitting here in this bar, surrounded by the comfortable murmur of other people's ordinary problems, she felt more fragile than glass. A movement caught her eye, and she looked up to see her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her skin pale and drawn. She looked like someone who'd been holding her breath underwater for too long. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and, somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like a funeral drum. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine Marcus walking through that door, shaking raindrops from his hair and grinning that infectious grin of his. He'd slide onto the stool next to her, order a beer, and tease her about drinking whiskey in a place like this. But, when she opened her eyes, the stool remained empty. The conversations around her began to blur together, becoming nothing more than white noise against the storm in her head. She thought about going home to her empty apartment, about facing another sleepless night filled with questions that would never have answers. She thought about calling in sick to work on Monday, about the pile of cases waiting on her desk at the law firm where she worked as a paralegal. None of it seemed to matter anymore. Sarah had built her life around the belief that persistence paid off, that if you worked hard enough and wanted something badly enough, you could make it happen. She'd graduated from college, found a good job, saved money, made plans. She'd done everything right, followed all the rules, and still life had taken the most important person in her world and refused to give him back. The unfairness of it all pressed down on her like a physical weight. She thought about all the people who took their families for granted, who complained about their siblings, who wasted the precious time they had together. Meanwhile, she would give anything for just 5 more minutes with Marcus, just long enough to say goodbye properly. A burst of laughter from the pool table area pulled her from her thoughts. A group of college-age kids was celebrating someone's lucky shot, their joy bright and uncomplicated. Sarah envied them their lightness, their ability to find happiness in small victories. She wondered if she'd ever feel that carefree again. The bartender appeared in front of her, his expression gentle. "Can I get you anything else?" he asked quietly. "Something to eat, maybe?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm fine, thanks." But they both knew she was lying. Time moved strangely in Murphy's bar. Minutes felt like hours, and hours compressed into moments. Sarah lost track of how long she'd been sitting there, watching her reflection in the whiskey, listening to the rain, trying to figure out how to continue living in a world without answers. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked. Emma had sent a simple message: "I love you. Come home when you're ready." For the first time all day, Sarah felt tears threaten to spill over. Emma understood. Emma knew that sometimes you needed to sit in the darkness for a while before you could face the light again. Emma knew that grief wasn't something you could schedule or control or fix with helpful advice. Sarah typed back, "I love you too. I'll be okay." She wasn't sure if it was true, but she needed to believe it might be someday. The storm outside began to ease, the thunder moving farther away, the rain settling into a gentler rhythm. Sarah finished her whiskey in one burning gulp and placed the empty glass on the bar. She left a $20 bill beside it and gathered her jacket. As she stood to leave, she felt the weight of the letter in her pocket one more time. Tomorrow, she would have to start figuring out how to live with this new reality. She would have to learn how to carry Marcus's memory without being crushed by it. She would have to find a way to honor his life while building her own. But, tonight, she just needed to go home and cry until there were no tears left. The rain had softened to a gentle mist by the time Sarah stepped outside. The air was clean and cool, washed free of dust and heat. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the cloudy sky, and whispered his name into the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed midnight. A new day was beginning, whether she was ready for it or not. 3 months had passed since that rainy night at Murphy's bar, and Sarah had slowly begun to rebuild the pieces of her shattered world. She'd returned to work at the law firm, thrown herself into her cases, and tried to establish some kind of normal routine. The grief was still there, a constant companion that followed her through each day, but she'd learned to carry it differently. She was reviewing depositions in her small office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. She answered cautiously. Sarah Mitchell? The voice was male, gravelly, with a slight southern accent. Yes, who is this? My name is Jack Coleman. I served with your brother Marcus. I was wondering if we could meet. Sarah's heart stopped. She'd received calls like this before, from other soldiers who'd known Marcus, offering condolences or sharing memories. But this felt different. There was an urgency in the man's voice, a weight that made her pulse quicken. Yes, of course. When? Tonight, if possible. I know it's short notice, but I'm only in town for a day. There's something I need to tell you about Marcus. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, away from the crowd and noise of the more popular places. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon unable to concentrate on anything, her mind spinning with possibilities. What could this Jack Coleman know that the military hadn't already told her? What new information could possibly emerge after all this time? She arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a corner table where they could speak privately. At exactly 6 o'clock, a man walked through the door who could only be Jack Coleman. He was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. His left arm hung slightly awkwardly at his side, and Sarah noticed the way he favored his right leg as he walked. Sarah? He approached her table with a careful smile. Thank you for meeting me. They shook hands, and Sarah was surprised by the firmness of his grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder experiences. As he sat down across from her, she studied his face, looking for any resemblance to Marcus, any clue about their connection. You served with Marcus, she said, needing to start somewhere. I did. We were in the same unit for 8 months before. He paused, his jaw tightening. Before the ambush. Sarah leaned forward. Were you there that day? Jack nodded slowly. I was in the lead vehicle. Marcus was in the second truck with Peterson, Williams, and Rodriguez. He stopped and took a deep breath, as if steadying himself. I've been wanting to talk to you for 3 years, but I couldn't. I was in and out of hospitals, dealing with my own recovery, and then there were other complications. What kind of complications? Jack glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was within earshot. The official report about what happened to your brother isn't complete. There's more to the story, things the military decided not to share with families. Sarah felt her world tilt. What do you mean? Marcus didn't die in that ambush, Sarah. At least, not the way they said. The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. What are you talking about? They said he was missing, presumed dead. He was taken prisoner. Along with Rodriguez. I saw it happen. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too bright. Sarah's vision blurred at the edges, and she had to focus on breathing steadily. Prisoner? The insurgents who ambushed us, they weren't just random fighters. They were part of a larger network, and they specifically targeted our patrol because they knew we'd be carrying intelligence. They killed Peterson and Williams immediately, but they took Marcus and Rodriguez alive. Sarah's mind reeled. But why didn't the military tell us this? Why isn't it in the report? Jack's expression darkened. Because the situation became classified. The intelligence our unit was carrying was related to a larger operation, something that could have compromised other missions if it became public knowledge. The military made the decision to classify the details of the ambush. So my brother could still be alive? The hope in her voice was so raw, so desperate, that Jack looked away for a moment. When he met her eyes again, his expression was gentle but grave. Sarah, I need you to understand something. It's been 3 years. The chances of Marcus still being alive are. He struggled to find the right words. Very small. But not impossible. Not impossible, he agreed quietly. Sarah felt like she was drowning and being saved at the same time. For 3 years, she'd grieved for a brother who might not be dead. For 3 years, she'd been given only half the truth. The anger that rose in her chest was swift and consuming. "They lied to us," she said, her voice shaking. "They let us bury an empty casket. They let my mother die thinking her son was dead when he might have been out there somewhere, waiting for rescue." "I know," Jack said. "I know, and I'm sorry. That's why I'm here. I couldn't live with it anymore." "What exactly did you see? Tell me everything." Jack took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "We were about 2 hours into the patrol when the first IED went off. It flipped the lead vehicle, my vehicle. I was thrown clear, but my driver wasn't so lucky. By the time I got my bearings, the shooting had started." He paused, his eyes distant as he relived the memory. "The second truck, Marcus's truck, was hit by an RPG. It didn't flip, but it was disabled. I could see smoke, hear shouting. I tried to move toward them, but I took shrapnel in my leg and my arm was messed up from the crash." "What about Marcus?" "I saw him get out of the truck. He was helping Rodriguez, who was hurt bad. Williams was already down, and Peterson was." Jack shook his head. "Marcus was trying to establish a defensive position when they came out of the buildings on both sides of the road." Sarah hung on every word, desperate for details about her brother's final moments of freedom. "There were maybe 15 of them, well coordinated, well armed. They knew exactly what they were doing. They killed Peterson and Williams quickly, but when they got to Marcus and Rodriguez, they zip-tied their hands and dragged them to a vehicle I hadn't seen before." "And you're certain it was Marcus?" "Positive. He was conscious, fighting them every step of the way. He kept looking back toward where I was lying, probably wondering if any of us were still alive to mount a rescue." Jack's voice grew thick. "I wanted to help him, but I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything but watch them take him." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 3 years' worth of unanswered questions. Sarah tried to process what she was hearing, to understand what it meant for everything she'd believed about Marcus's fate. "What happened after that?" "I managed to activate my emergency beacon before I passed out. The rescue team found me about 4 hours later. By then, Marcus and Rodriguez were long gone." "And the military just decided not to tell us any of this?" Jack nodded grimly. "The intelligence Marcus's unit was carrying was critical to an ongoing operation. If word got out that Americans had been taken prisoner, it could have jeopardized other missions and put more lives at risk. The decision was made at the highest levels to classify the details." Sarah felt sick. "So they sacrificed the truth about my brother for the sake of other operations?" "I'm not defending the decision," Jack said carefully. "I'm just explaining it. The military deals in worst-case scenarios and acceptable losses. To them, Marcus and Rodriguez became acceptable losses the moment they were taken. But they could have mounted a rescue mission. They tried. For weeks, they tried. I was debriefed as soon as I was stable enough, gave them every detail I could remember about the vehicles, the direction they headed, the appearance of the fighters. Intelligence worked around the clock trying to track them down. What happened? Nothing. They disappeared completely. It was like they vanished into thin air." Jack leaned back in his chair, looking older than his years. "The region where the ambush happened is a maze of caves and hidden compounds. The insurgents knew that terrain better than we ever could." Sarah stared into her untouched coffee, trying to make sense of it all. "So for 3 years, while we've been grieving, Marcus could have been in some prison somewhere." "Sarah, you need to understand something. Even if Marcus was alive after the capture, the likelihood of him surviving 3 years in insurgent custody is almost zero. These aren't people who take prisoners to exchange them later. They take them for information, and, once they get what they want." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood. "But, you said almost zero." "Not zero." Jack studied her face, seeing the familiar combination of hope and desperation that he'd carried himself for 3 years. "There have been rumors. Unconfirmed reports. Stories from other prisoners who've been released or rescued about American soldiers being held in remote locations. What kind of stories? Nothing concrete. Just whispers. A man who might have been Rodriguez was supposedly seen at a compound near the Pakistani border 2 years ago. Another report mentioned an American who matched Marcus's description being moved between locations last year. Sarah felt her heart racing. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because I didn't want to give you false hope. Because even if these reports are true, the chances of finding them, of mounting a successful rescue after all this time, are practically non-existent. But, not impossible. Jack sighed. Not impossible. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelation settling between them. Sarah thought about all the nights she'd lain awake wondering what Marcus's final moments had been like, whether he'd suffered, whether he'd thought about her. Now she had to consider the possibility that his final moments might not have come yet. There's something else, Jack said quietly. Sarah looked up, not sure she could handle any more revelations. I've been in contact with some people. Former military, private contractors, people who specialize in difficult situations. They think there might be a way to get more information. What kind of information? The kind that could tell us definitively whether Marcus and Rodriguez are still alive. And, if they are, where they're being held. Sarah's pulse quickened. Are you talking about some kind of rescue mission? I'm talking about getting answers. Real answers. Not the sanitized version the government gave you. How? Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice. There's a group of us. Former soldiers who've been affected by classified situations like this. We call ourselves Shadow 6. We help families get the truth when the official channels won't. Shadow 6, Sarah repeated, the name feeling heavy on her tongue. We've had some success. 3 families in the past 2 years have gotten real answers about their missing sons because of our work. It's not always good news, but it's always the truth. Sarah felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in months, hope. It was dangerous, she knew. It could lead to more heartbreak, more disappointment. But, it was also the first real chance she'd had to learn the truth about Marcus. What would I have to do? Nothing illegal. Nothing that would put you in danger. We handled the dangerous part. All we need from you is permission to investigate, and a way to fund the operation. How much money are we talking about? $50,000. It covers equipment, transportation, contacts in the region, bribes for information. It's not cheap, but it's the only way to get real results. Sarah's mind raced. She had some savings, but not nearly enough. She'd have to sell her car, maybe take out a loan against her apartment. It would mean risking everything she'd built since Marcus disappeared. But it also meant possibly finding him. I need time to think about it, she said. Jack nodded. Of course. But, Sarah, I need you to understand something. If you decide to do this, there's no going back. Once we start investigating, we're committed to finding the truth, whatever that truth might be. I understand. Jack pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. My number's on there. When you've made your decision, call me. But don't wait too long. The longer we wait, the colder the trail gets. Sarah picked up the card, her fingers tracing the simple black text, Jack Coleman, private consultant. Below it was a phone number and an email address. No fancy logo, no company name. Just the promise of answers she'd been seeking for 3 years. As Jack stood to leave, Sarah looked up at him. Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? His expression softened, and, for a moment, the hardened soldier facade fell away. Because Marcus saved my life that day. When the IED went off, I was pinned under debris from my vehicle. Marcus could have stayed with his own truck, could have focused on his own survival. Instead, he came looking for survivors. He pulled me free before the shooting started. Jack paused, emotion threatening to break through his careful control. I owe him my life, Sarah. And I owe you the truth. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at the business card and trying to decide whether she was being offered salvation or destruction. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Marcus had always loved. For the first time in 3 years, her brother's fate was in her hands. Sarah spent 2 sleepless weeks wrestling with Jack Coleman's offer. She'd call the number on his business card a dozen times, only to hang up before it connected. She'd researched everything she could find about private military contractors, missing soldiers, and rescue operations. She'd even driven to the bank twice to inquire about loans, sitting in the parking lot for 30 minutes before driving home without going inside. Emma noticed her sister's distraction immediately. During their weekly dinner at their father's house, she'd watched Sarah push food around her plate and stare out the window with an expression she hadn't seen since those dark months after Marcus first disappeared. "What's going on with you?" Emma finally asked as they cleared the dishes while their father dozed in his recliner. Sarah dried the same plate 3 times before answering. "Someone contacted me." "A soldier who served with Marcus." Emma set down the dish she was washing and turned to face her sister fully. "What did he want?" "To tell me the truth about what happened." The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the old wall clock their mother had loved. Emma studied Sarah's face, seeing the familiar combination of hope and torment that had defined their family for 3 years. "What kind of truth?" Sarah told her everything. About Jack Coleman's injuries, about Marcus being taken prisoner, about the classified nature of the mission that had cost her brother his freedom. She told Emma about Shadow 6 and their offer to investigate, about the $50,000 and the possibility that Marcus might still be alive. When she finished, Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Do you believe him?" "I want to," Sarah admitted. "But I don't know if that's because it's true or because I need it to be true." "What does your gut tell you?" Sarah considered the question. Her gut told her that Jack Coleman was a man carrying his own heavy load of guilt and regret. It told her that his story had the ring of truth, with all its uncomfortable complexities and moral ambiguities. It told her that this might be her only chance to learn what really happened to Marcus. "I think he's telling the truth," she said quietly. Emma nodded slowly. "Then, you have to do it. It's $50,000. If this goes wrong, I'll lose everything. And if you don't do it, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what if." Emma dried her hands on a dish towel and faced her sister. "Sarah, you've been half alive since we got that letter. If there's any chance Marcus is out there, any chance at all, you have to take it. What if we find out he's dead? What if we learn he died horribly, and we have to live with those details for the rest of our lives? Then, at least we'll know," Emma said firmly. "And we can finally put him to rest properly." That night, Sarah called Jack Coleman. "I'm in," she said when he answered. "Tell me what you need me to do." 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, meeting the rest of Shadow 6. Jack had warned her that it wouldn't look like much, but she was still surprised by the modest setup. The warehouse was filled with computer equipment, maps, filing cabinets, and what looked like enough military gear to outfit a small army. "Welcome to headquarters," Jack said with a slight smile as he led her inside. The other members of Shadow 6 were nothing like what Sarah had expected. There was Maria Santos, a former Army intelligence officer who'd left the service after her own brother was killed in a training accident the military had tried to cover up. David Kim, an ex-Navy SEAL who'd lost his leg in Afghanistan and now used his connections to help other veterans navigate the bureaucracy. And Rebecca Torres, a former CIA analyst who'd gone private after becoming disillusioned with government intelligence work. They were all damaged in their own ways, Sarah realized, but they'd found purpose in helping others navigate the same system that had failed them. "Every case is different," Maria explained as they gathered around a conference table covered with maps and satellite photos. "But they all start the same way. We gather every piece of available intelligence, we identify sources in the region, and we build a complete picture of what happened." David pulled out a thick folder labeled with Marcus's name and service number. "We've already started preliminary research based on Jack's report. The ambush site, the insurgent groups operating in that area at the time, known prison locations within a 100-mile radius of where your brother was taken." Rebecca activated a laptop and began showing Sarah satellite images on a large monitor. The good news is that the region has been more stable in recent years. The bad news is that stability makes it easier for long-term prison operations to remain hidden. What exactly are you planning to do? Sarah asked. Phase 1 is intelligence gathering, Jack explained. We have contacts throughout the region, former translators, local officials, tribal leaders who owe us favors. We put out feelers, ask the right questions, see if anyone has information about American prisoners. Phase 2 is verification, Maria continued. If we get promising leads, we investigate further. Sometimes that means paying for information, sometimes it means more direct reconnaissance. And Phase 3? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Phase 3 depends entirely on what we find in Phases 1 and 2, David said carefully. But, we want to be clear with you, if we locate your brother and he's still alive, we're not equipped to mount a full-scale rescue operation. That would require resources and authorization we don't have. So what would you do? We'd take our findings to people who can do something about it, Rebecca said. We have contacts in various government agencies, people who can make things happen if the evidence is solid enough. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Part of her had been imagining a dramatic rescue mission, a team of commandos storming a fortress to bring Marcus home. The reality was more complex and uncertain. How long will all of this take? She asked. Phase 1, about 6 weeks, Jack said. We'll know within that timeframe whether there's any credible information about Marcus or Rodriguez still being held. If we find something promising, phases 2 and 3 could take several months longer. Sarah nodded, trying to process the timeline. 6 weeks to learn whether her brother might still be alive. It seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Maria said gently. The money. Sarah had brought a cashier's check for $25,000, everything she'd been able to scrape together by liquidating her savings account, selling her car, and taking a loan against her apartment. It wasn't the full amount, but it was a start. I can get the rest, she promised. I just need a little more time. Jack waved his hand dismissively. 25 is enough to get started. We'll worry about the rest if and when we need it. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked, looking around the table at these people who barely knew her but were willing to risk their own safety for her brother. I mean, really? Why? The question hung in the air for a moment before Rebecca answered. Because the system failed all of us, she said simply. The military, the government, the bureaucracy that's supposed to protect soldiers and their families. It failed your brother, it failed Jack, it failed all of us in different ways. This is our way of fighting back. And, because no one should have to live without knowing the truth about someone they love, David added. We've all been there. We know what that uncertainty does to a person, to a family. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd been strong for so long, had held her family together through the worst of their grief. But, sitting here with these strangers who understood her pain in ways her closest friends never could, she felt safe enough to let her guard down slightly. What if we don't find anything? She asked. What if Marcus really did die that day, and we're chasing ghosts? Then, at least you'll know, Jack said. And, knowing, even when the news is bad, is better than wondering for the rest of your life. That evening, Sarah called Emma to tell her about the meeting and the plan. Her sister listened quietly as Sarah described Shadow 6, their methodology, their realistic approach to the investigation. They seemed professional, Emma said when Sarah finished. Not like some kind of mercenary group or vigilantes. They are professional. Damaged, but professional. Sarah paused. I need to ask you something. If this goes badly, if I lose everything I've invested in this and we still don't find Marcus, will you be okay? Financially, I mean. If something happens to me, if I can't help with Dad's expenses or if you need support. Don't, Emma interrupted. Don't start planning for failure before you've even begun. And don't worry about me or Dad. We'll be fine. You just focus on finding our brother. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her empty apartment. She'd sold most of her furniture to raise money for Shadow 6, and tried to imagine what Marcus might be doing at that moment.
If he was alive, if he was imprisoned somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, what was he thinking about? Did he know his family was still looking for him? Did he have hope that someone would come for him eventually?
She pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to her boss at the law firm, requesting a 6-week leave of absence. She'd saved up enough vacation time to cover most of it, and she had some family emergency days she could use. It would be tight, but she could make it work. The next morning, Sarah received a call from Maria Santos. "We've made contact with our primary source in Kabul," Maria reported.
"He's agreed to start asking questions about American prisoners taken in the region 3 years ago. He thinks he might have some leads within the week."
"That's fast," Sarah said, surprised.
"Sometimes it is. Information about American prisoners is valuable currency in that part of the world. People remember details because they know someone might pay for them someday."
"What kind of details?"
"Physical descriptions, locations where prisoners were held, routes used to transport them between facilities."
"Our source is particularly interested in the time frame of your brother's capture because there was increased American activity in the region around that period." Sarah felt her heart racing.
American activity?
"Search operations, mostly unsuccessful. But they created enough chatter that local networks remember the time period clearly."
"If Marcus and Rodriguez were moved through the area, someone will remember."
After the call ended, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the city waking up below her. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was actually doing something productive about Marcus's situation instead of just waiting for other people to give her information. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jack. "Phase 1 officially begins today.
We'll update you as soon as we have anything." Sarah typed back, "Thank you for everything."
But, as she sent the message, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to learn things about her brother's fate that would change everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and the price of hope. Outside her window, the city continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, her twin brother might be counting days and dreaming of home, just as she was counting days and dreaming of finding him. The investigation had begun, and there was no turning back now. 5 weeks into the investigation, Sarah had heard nothing but dead ends and false leads. Maria's contact in Kabul had produced a dozen different stories about American prisoners, none of which matched Marcus's description or timeline. David's military connections had yielded old intelligence reports that mentioned prisoner transfers but provided no concrete details. Rebecca's analysis of satellite imagery had identified several possible prison locations, but follow-up investigations had found them either abandoned or used for entirely different purposes.
Sarah was beginning to lose hope when Jack called her on a Thursday evening in late October.
"We need to meet," he said without preamble.
"Tonight. Same coffee shop as before."
Something in his tone made Sarah's stomach clench.
"What is it? Did you find something? Just meet me there in an hour. And, Sarah, bring someone with you. Your sister, maybe. You're going to want support for this."
The hour that followed was the longest of Sarah's life. She called Emma, who dropped everything to drive across town and meet them. They sat in Emma's car outside the coffee shop for 10 minutes, both too nervous to go inside. "Whatever it is," Emma said finally, "we'll handle it together." Jack was already waiting when they walked in, sitting at the same corner table where he'd first told Sarah the truth about Marcus's capture. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see tension in the set of his shoulders, in the way his fingers drummed against his coffee cup. After brief introductions, Jack pulled out a tablet and set it on the table between them.
3 days ago, we got a break," he began. "Rebecca's contact in Pakistan reached out with information about a prisoner exchange that happened 18 months ago. An American soldier was traded to a different group, moved from Afghanistan into Pakistan." Sarah's heart began to race. "Marcus? We think so."
The physical description matches: 6'1", brown hair, scar on his left hand from when he cut himself fixing your father's lawnmower when he was 16.
Sarah gripped Emma's hand under the table.
The scar detail was something only family would know, something Marcus would have told another prisoner to prove his identity.
"Where is he now?" Emma asked. Jack's expression grew even more grave. That's complicated.
The group that received him in the exchange, they're not typical insurgents. They're more like a criminal organization. They specialize in long-term captivity, keeping prisoners as assets rather than sources of immediate intelligence.
Assets for what? Ransom, mostly.
They hold high-value prisoners and wait for the right opportunity to negotiate for money, weapons, or prisoner releases.
It's a business for them.
Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and horror. If Marcus was being held for ransom, it meant he was probably being kept alive and relatively unharmed. But it also meant he'd been suffering in captivity for 3.5 years while his family had been told to accept his death.
Do you know where he's being held?
Jack activated the tablet, showing them satellite images of a remote compound in the mountains of Pakistan, near the Afghan border. Here. It's heavily fortified, isolated, and, according to our sources, currently housing 4 prisoners, 3 Americans and 1 British soldier.
Emma leaned forward to study the images. How certain are you that Marcus is there? 80%.
Our source was able to provide details about the prisoners that match not just Marcus, but Rodriguez as well. The 3rd American is a pilot who was shot down 2 years ago. The British soldier was captured 6 months ago. Sarah stared at the aerial photographs, trying to imagine her brother somewhere within those concrete walls and guard towers.
What happens now?
This was the question Jack had been dreading.
He set down his coffee cup and met Sarah's eyes directly. This is where things get complicated. The group holding these prisoners has been in contact with various intelligence agencies for months, trying to negotiate a trade.
They want $20 million and the release of 15 insurgents currently being held at Guantanamo Bay.
20 million?
Sarah felt the world spinning around her.
That's impossible. For individual families, yes.
But the governments involved have been quietly negotiating.
The problem is that officially, these prisoners don't exist.
The military maintains that all 4 men are dead, killed in action. Any rescue attempt or ransom negotiation would require admitting that families have been lied to for years.
Emma spoke up for the first time. So they're just going to leave them there? Let them rot in some prison because it's politically convenient? Not necessarily. Rebecca has learned that there's been movement on this case recently.
Someone high up in the intelligence community has been pushing for action, but it has to be done completely off the books.
Sarah felt a flicker of hope. What kind of action? Jack hesitated before answering. A private extraction.
Not an official military operation, but a contract job using private military contractors. It would be funded through back channels, with plausible deniability for all government agencies involved.
When? Soon. Possibly within the next month. The political situation in the region is shifting, and there's a window of opportunity that won't stay open long. Sarah tried to process what she was hearing.
After 3.5 years of bureaucratic stonewalling and official denials, there might actually be a real rescue attempt for Marcus. But something in Jack's tone suggested there was more to the story.
What aren't you telling me? She asked.
Jack exchanged glances with something behind Sarah's shoulder, and she turned to see David Kim walking through the coffee shop door. He nodded at their table and ordered something at the counter before joining them.
Sorry I'm late, David said as he sat down.
I just got off the phone with our contact at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Sarah looked between Jack and David, sensing that this meeting had been more carefully orchestrated than it initially appeared. The extraction operation is real, David continued.
But it's not being run by the government.
It's being privately funded by families of the prisoners, with support from some retired military and intelligence officials who believe these men deserve to be rescued.
Emma frowned. What does that mean, exactly? It means the families are being asked to contribute to the cost of the operation. The total budget is $8 million, split 4 ways among the prisoners' families.
Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach.
$2 million? Each family has to pay $2 million?
It's not ideal, Jack said quietly.
But it's the only way to make this happen.
The government can't officially fund a rescue operation for soldiers who are officially dead.
But private citizens can fund whatever operations they choose.
I don't have $2 million, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't have anywhere close to $2 million. The other families are in similar situations, David said. Rodriguez's parents are mortgaging their house and borrowing against their business. The pilot's wife is liquidating her husband's entire portfolio and taking loans against his life insurance policy. The British soldier's family is selling everything they own. Sarah stared at the table, trying to comprehend the impossible choice she was being offered. Marcus might be alive, might be rescued, might come home, if she could somehow find $2 million.
How long do I have to decide?
The operation is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, Jack said. If we don't have funding confirmation from all 4 families by then, the whole thing gets scrapped. Emma squeezed her sister's hand.
There has to be another way.
Loans, fundraising, something.
David shook his head. We've explored every option.
Banks won't loan that kind of money against the uncertainty of the situation. Crowdfunding campaigns would draw too much attention and potentially compromise the operation. This has to be done quietly, with immediate access to cash. Sarah felt tears starting to well up in her eyes. To be this close to potentially saving Marcus, only to be stopped by something as mundane as money, seemed impossibly cruel.
What if I can't raise the money? She asked. What happens to Marcus then?
The operation goes forward with whatever families can participate, Jack said gently.
But the rescue plan is designed around extracting all 4 prisoners simultaneously.
Leaving someone behind would significantly complicate future rescue attempts. The implication was clear, this might be Marcus's only chance. Sarah excused herself and walked to the restroom, where she splashed cold water on her face and tried to think clearly.
$2 million.
She'd already spent everything she had on Shadow 6's investigation. Her apartment was mortgaged, her car was sold, her savings were gone. Even if she could convince a bank to loan her money, there was no way to get anywhere close to $2 million.
Unless.
When she returned to the table, Emma was deep in conversation with Jack and David about the operational details of the rescue.
Sarah interrupted them. What about life insurance? She asked. Emma looked confused. What do you mean?
Marcus's life insurance. He had a policy through the military, plus a private policy he bought when he enlisted. If he's officially dead, those policies should have paid out by now.
David consulted his tablet. Military life insurance would have gone to your parents as primary beneficiaries, with you and Emma as secondary. The private policy made me the primary beneficiary, Sarah finished.
Marcus changed it right before his last deployment. He said since he wasn't married, I should get the money to help take care of Mom and Dad.
Jack frowned. But, if you've never collected on those policies.
Because we never had a body, never had an official death certificate, Emma said, understanding dawning on her face. The insurance companies have been waiting for definitive proof of death. Sarah felt her pulse quickening. The private policy was for $1.5 million. The military policy would be another $500,000.
Together. $2 million, David said quietly.
For the next hour, they worked through the logistics. Sarah would need to formally accept the military's declaration of Marcus's death, obtain death certificates, and file claims on both life insurance policies. The process typically took several weeks, but David knew people who could expedite it for a situation like this. There's one thing you need to understand, Jack said as they prepared to leave. Once you file those claims, once you officially accept that Marcus is dead and collect his life insurance, there's no going back. Even if the rescue succeeds and he comes home, he'll officially have been dead for 3 years.
What does that mean for him? New identity, probably.
New social security number, new military record. The government would have to create an entirely new existence for him to cover up the fact that they lied about his death in the first place.
Sarah considered this.
Marcus would come home, but he wouldn't really be Marcus anymore, at least not officially.
He'd be someone else, someone created by paperwork and bureaucratic necessity.
Would I rather have him alive with a new identity, or dead with his real name? She asked rhetorically. That's a question only you can answer, Emma said softly. That night, Sarah sat in her nearly empty apartment with the death certificate application in front of her. All she had to do was sign the papers, officially declare her twin brother dead, and use his life insurance money to potentially bring him home. The irony was not lost on her. She picked up a pen and signed her name on the line marked next of kin. Then, she called Jack Coleman. "I'm in," she said when he answered. "File the paperwork. Start the process. Whatever it takes to bring Marcus home." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in Murphy's bar where this entire journey had begun 6 months earlier. In her purse was a cashier's check for $2 million, Marcus's life insurance money, payment for his rescue operation. In 12 hours, a team of private military contractors would assault a compound in Pakistan and attempt to bring her brother home. She ordered a whiskey, the same thing she'd been drinking that rainy night when her world fell apart. But, this time, she wasn't drinking to numb the pain. She was drinking to steady her nerves for what might be the most important night of her life. The bartender, Tom, recognized her from that night months ago. "You look different," he said as he poured her drink. "Better." Sarah smiled. "I'm about to find out if my brother is still alive." Tom raised his eyebrows but didn't ask for details. He'd learned long ago that people came to Murphy's bar with all kinds of stories, and most of them were true. At exactly midnight, Sarah's phone rang. Jack Coleman's voice was tired but triumphant. "We got them," he said. "All 4. Marcus is alive, Sarah. He's hurt, he's weak, but he's alive. And he's coming home." Sarah closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely. In the background, she could hear the familiar sounds of the bar, conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses. Normal life continuing around her while her world transformed completely. "When will I see him?" she whispered. "Soon," Jack promised. "Very soon." Outside Murphy's bar, the rain began to fall again, just as it had on the night this all began. But, this time, Sarah Mitchell walked out into the storm with her head held high, knowing that somewhere across the world, her twin brother was finally coming home.